AITA for kicking my brother out after he sold something of mine without asking. I, 25F, have always had a decent relationship with my brother, 28M. We were never super close, but we got along well enough. He has always been the kind of person who kind of just floats through life without much planning, and while it annoyed me sometimes, I never let it bother me too much because, well, it wasn't my problem. But recently, it very much became my problem, and now my entire family is telling me that I overreacted when, in my opinion, I had every right to react exactly the way I did. A few months ago, my brother found himself in a tough spot. He had been bouncing from job to job, never really sticking with anything for too long, and eventually, he ended up unemployed with no place to stay. He had been crashing on a friend's couch for a bit, but apparently, that situation wasn't working out anymore, and he needed somewhere to go. Enter me. Being the ever-so-kind little sister, I offered to let him stay at my place for a while. I made it clear that I wasn't asking for rent or utilities or anything like that, but I did have one simple request: respect my space. I live alone, and I like it that way. My home is my sanctuary. I told him all I needed was for him to be considerate, clean up after himself, and not treat my apartment like a hotel. Simple, right? Wrong. From the moment he moved in, it was like he took every request I made and actively did the opposite. Dishes left all over the place, even though I reminded him multiple times that I don't have a magic cleaning fairy. Coming home late. Oh, absolutely, and usually drunk, making all kinds of noise, slamming doors, stumbling into things, waking me up at ungodly hours like I didn't have work in the morning. Bringing people over. Constantly. Random people. People I had never met before, never got a heads up about, just waltzing into my apartment like they lived there too. And when I confronted him about it, he always had an excuse. Oh, he forgot to clean up. Oh, he didn't think I'd hear him come in. Oh, it was just a couple of friends, no big deal. It was exhausting. Every time I tried to lay down boundaries, he ignored them. Every time I asked for basic respect, he acted like I was being uptight. And I put up with it way longer than I should have because, despite everything, he was my brother, and I didn't want to be the person who kicked him out when he had nowhere else to go. Then, last week, I noticed something. My AirPods Max were gone. Now, I am not someone who misplaces things, especially not something that expensive. I always keep them in the same spot, on my desk, right next to my laptop. But when I went to grab them, they weren't there. I looked everywhere. I checked my bag, my nightstand, the kitchen, even under the couch. Nothing. And I knew, deep down, that I hadn't lost them. So I asked my brother. Casually at first. Hey, have you seen my headphones? They were on my desk. And he barely even looked up from his phone when he responded, oh yeah, I sold them. I needed some quick cash. I was gonna tell you. I cannot explain the level of rage I felt in that moment. It was like my brain short-circuited. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had stolen from me. Not only stolen but sold something that was mine, something I had worked hard to buy, something I used every single day, and he had the audacity to act like it was no big deal. No remorse, no apology, just a casual, I was gonna tell you. I saw red. I told him, in no uncertain terms, that he had 24 hours to pack his things and get out. He tried to argue, of course. Said I was overreacting, that it was just a pair of headphones, that he needed the money, that he didn't think I'd mind because I could just buy another pair. As if that was supposed to make it better. As if the issue was the headphones and not the absolute betrayal of trust. I didn't care. I told him I didn't want to hear another word. I had let him walk all over me for weeks, and I was done. He had a day to figure something else out, and I wasn't going to budge. He left. He packed up his stuff, shot me a few dirty looks, muttered some things under his breath, but he left. And honestly, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because now my parents are involved. And apparently, in their eyes, I am the villain in this situation. They told me I should have given him more time to figure things out, that kicking him out so suddenly was harsh, that he was struggling, and I should have been more understanding. When I explained why I kicked him out, they didn't seem to think it was that big of a deal. He was desperate, they said. He wouldn't have done it if he wasn't struggling. As if that somehow justified it. As if the fact that he was having a hard time meant he had the right to steal from me. I asked them if they would have been okay with someone taking their things and selling them without permission, and they brushed it off. It's different, he's your brother. Yeah. And? I haven't spoken to him since he left, and honestly, I don't feel bad about it. What I do feel bad about is the fact that my family is acting like I'm the problem, like I'm the one who should be apologizing when he was the one who stole from me. I feel like I was more than fair. I gave him a place to stay. I gave him chance after chance. And he repaid me by stealing from me. So, am I the asshole? Because right now, my entire family seems to think I am. Update 1. Wow, so I did not expect my post to blow up like that. First of all, thank you to everyone who commented, shared their thoughts, and reached out with support. I honestly thought I was losing my mind there for a second. It's one of those situations where you start doubting yourself because the people around you make you feel like you're the one in the wrong, even when everything in you is screaming that you're not. Reading all the responses made me feel so much more validated. It was like a massive weight lifted off my shoulders knowing that I wasn't the only one who saw this for what it was. And honestly, it's wild how many people have dealt with similar situations. I got messages from people telling me they had gone through the exact same thing with a sibling, a cousin, even a parent. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that this is more common than I thought, but at the same time, it's kind of sad that so many people can relate to being taken advantage of by their own family. And since a lot of you asked for an update, well, buckle up, because things have escalated in ways I did not see coming. So after I kicked my brother out, he ended up crashing with a friend. I wasn't sure who exactly, and honestly, I didn't care. The way I saw it, it was no longer my problem. He had burned his bridge with me, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. But my parents? Oh, they were still very much on my case. Calling, texting, leaving voicemails, some of them guilt-trippy, some of them outright annoyed with me. Every single conversation boiled down to the same thing: I should have given him more time. I should have been more patient. I should have been the bigger person. Because, according to them, that's what family does. Family helps family, no matter what. It was exhausting. I kept repeating the same thing over and over: he stole from me. He went into my space, took something that belonged to me, sold it, and acted like it wasn't a big deal. And they kept countering with, well, he was in a tough spot. As if that somehow justified it. As if that made it okay for him to treat my home like his personal playground and my belongings like an all-access ATM. It was like talking to a wall. Nothing I said got through to them because, in their minds, he was the struggling older brother who just needed a little more support. And me? I was the cold-hearted little sister who had thrown him out when he needed me most. But then, plot twist, he did it again. Apparently, while staying at his friend's place, he pulled the exact same stunt. From what I've gathered, he had been staying with a guy he knew from high school, someone who was doing him a favor just like I had. And, just like with me, my brother completely took advantage of the situation. Same patterns, same behavior. Leaving messes everywhere, treating the place like his own personal hangout spot, inviting people over without permission. But the real kicker? He stole from his friend too. This time, it was a gaming console. From what I heard, it was a PS5. Just took it, sold it for quick cash, and acted like it wasn't a big deal. And just like that, he was kicked out again. I found out about this in the most ridiculous way possible. I wasn't even speaking to my brother, so it wasn't like he called me up and told me what happened. No, I found out when my mom called me in a complete panic. At first, I thought she was going to tell me that something serious had happened, like he got into an accident or was in some kind of danger, because she sounded frantic. But no. She was calling because his friend had reached out to my parents. My brother had nowhere else to go, and, surprise, surprise, he was asking them for money. And of course, my parents were blindsided. They had been so convinced that I was the unreasonable one, that I had overreacted, that I was just being cruel for kicking him out. But now that the same exact thing had happened again, to someone else, no less, they suddenly weren't so sure. Suddenly, the reality of the situation was hitting them in the face, and they didn't know what to do with it. My mom actually admitted she might have been too quick to defend him. And the way she said it? She sounded shaken. Like this was the moment everything clicked for her, and she finally saw him for who he really was. Like she had spent so long convincing herself that he was just struggling, that he just needed help, that when reality smacked her in the face, it completely threw her. It was almost sad, in a way, because I could tell she wanted so badly to believe he was just in a rough patch. But even she couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. My dad, on the other hand, still in full-on denial mode. Classic. He changed the subject every time I brought it up, like if he ignored it long enough, it would just go away. Like if he just pretended hard enough, my brother would magically turn things around and be the person my dad wanted to believe he was. And as for my brother, he's apparently hopping from couch to couch, burning bridges left and right. I don't know where he's staying now, and honestly, I don't care to know. I haven't spoken to him, and I don't plan to. At this point, what is there to say? He's not sorry. He's not trying to change. He's just moving from one person to the next, taking what he can until he gets caught, and then moving on. The worst part is, I think my parents are struggling with the reality that they can't fix this. They spent so long defending him, making excuses for him, believing he just needed help, that now they don't know what to do. And while my mom is at least willing to admit she was wrong, my dad is still clinging to denial like a life raft. I can see it in the way he talks about my brother, like he's just going through a rough patch and will turn things around any day now. But he won't. Not until he faces real consequences. Not until he runs out of people willing to clean up his messes. So yeah, turns out I wasn't overreacting. Update 2. Just when I thought I had seen it all, my parents managed to surprise me in the worst way possible. A few days after the whole PS5 debacle, when I thought they had finally started to understand who my brother really was, I got a call from my mom. At first, I figured it was going to be another half-hearted apology or another round of, "We don't know what to do," because that had basically been their go-to response ever since his latest stunt. But no. This time, it was something much worse. She hit me with a line so audacious that I almost dropped my phone. "You need to let your brother stay with you again." It took me a second to even process what she was saying. After everything that had happened, after all the drama, after all the stress and anger and betrayal, she seriously thought I was going to open my door to him again. Apparently, after getting kicked out by his friend, my brother had done the one thing I never thought he would: he went to our parents. The same parents who had been defending him non-stop, calling me heartless for throwing him out, acting like I was the villain for refusing to tolerate his behavior. Turns out, their tune changed real fast when he was suddenly their problem. He showed up at their house, bags in hand, expecting to just walk in like nothing had happened. And, at first, they let him stay. Because of course they did. Because he's family. Because he was struggling. Because he just needed support. They welcomed him in with open arms, the same way they had expected me to, fully convinced that things would be different. That they would be able to handle him. That their love and patience would somehow change his behavior when all my boundaries and warnings apparently hadn't been enough. And for about 3 days, they held on to that delusion. 3 days before my mom caught him digging through drawers in their bedroom, claiming he was just looking for something. 3 days before my dad noticed his expensive watch mysteriously missing from its usual spot. 3 days before the paranoia set in and they started locking their own bedroom doors. And suddenly, they didn't want him there anymore. Just like that, the sympathy and endless excuses dried up. It was all fun and games when it was my space he was trashing, when it was my property he was stealing, when it was my life he was turning upside down. But the moment it became their problem, the moment he started treating their home the way he had treated mine, suddenly, it wasn't just a rough patch anymore. Suddenly, it wasn't just a desperate mistake. Suddenly, it was real. And, naturally, their solution was to send him back to me. Their reasoning was so absurd it was almost comical. My mom tried to argue that I had more space, as if my tiny one-bedroom apartment was somehow a better option than their actual house. She pulled the family card again, like that hadn't already been beaten into the ground. She insisted that I owed it to him, that I should give him another chance, conveniently forgetting that I had given him a chance, and he had thrown it away without a second thought. I shut it down immediately. There was no hesitation, no wavering. Absolutely not. I had already set myself on fire once to keep him warm, and I wasn't about to do it again just because they didn't want to deal with the consequences of their own enabling. And oh, the guilt trip that followed. My dad was next, calling me with a tired voice, sighing heavily like he was the victim in all of this. He told me they just didn't have the energy for this, and that they didn't know what else to do, as if that somehow made it my responsibility. He tried to hit me with the classic, "He's your family, you can't just abandon him," and I threw it right back at him. So what, they were allowed to abandon him, but I wasn't. That shut him up real quick. But they didn't stop there. They called repeatedly, left messages, sent texts at all hours. When they realized I wasn't budging, they started reaching out to other family members, trying to turn them against me, hoping that someone else would pressure me into caving. Suddenly, I was the selfish one again. The ungrateful, heartless sister who was refusing to help her own brother in his time of need. The calls started coming in from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly so concerned about family unity and forgiveness. It was infuriating. But I held my ground. Because at the end of the day, I knew exactly what would happen if I let him back in. It wouldn't be different. He wouldn't change. He wouldn't suddenly respect my space or my boundaries. He would do the same thing he always did, take, until there was nothing left to give. And I refused to be his safety net just because my parents had finally decided that they didn't want to play that role anymore. For a while, it seemed like they might actually have to face the reality of the mess they had helped create. That they would have no choice but to deal with him on their own, to finally acknowledge that this was who he was, that this was the result of all the excuses, all the enabling, all the times they had looked the other way. Until, of course, my brother pulled one final move that even I didn't see coming. Update 3. After days of back and forth, after every manipulative trick in the book, my parents finally got desperate enough to do something truly ridiculous. Something I never would have thought they'd actually go through with. They drove my brother to my apartment. As in, physically brought him to my doorstep, bags packed in the trunk, expecting me to just let him in like this was some kind of forced reconciliation sitcom episode. As if I had just been waiting for the right moment to give in and welcome him back into my home with open arms. I had barely opened the door before my mom started in on me, launching into a pre-rehearsed speech about how they couldn't do this anymore, how he was my responsibility too, how I needed to stop being so harsh. Her voice cracked just enough to make it sound like she was the victim here, like this whole situation had been an unbearable burden on her, like she hadn't spent weeks telling me I was the one who needed to be more patient, more understanding. My dad stood beside her, silent but stern, trying to guilt me into submission the way he always did when words didn't work. And my brother? He just stood there. Arms crossed. Not looking remotely sorry. Not saying a word. Just waiting. That was what got me the most. He wasn't pleading his case. He wasn't apologizing or promising that things would be different. He wasn't even pretending. He was just waiting. Because he expected this to work. Because he had spent his entire life watching people cave to his behavior, and this time was no different. Except it was. I wasn't falling for it. I wasn't going to be another stop on his endless cycle of screwing people over and expecting them to clean up the mess. I wasn't going to be the one to let my parents off the hook just because they finally realized they didn't want to deal with the consequences of their own enabling. So I looked them straight in the eye and asked them, if you don't want him in your house because you don't trust him, why on earth would you think I should? And then I shut the door in their faces. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. They stood there for a while, knocking, calling my name, leaving voicemails I didn't bother listening to. When they finally left, it was with my mom crying, overwhelmed with frustration and guilt, and my dad radiating that silent, simmering rage he reserved for moments when he didn't know how to argue his way out of being wrong. They were angry, but more than that, they were embarrassed. They had spent so much time defending my brother, justifying his actions, blaming me for being too unforgiving, and now they were forced to reckon with the reality of who he was. And the best part? My brother still ended up back at their house that same night. For all their bluster about how they couldn't do this anymore, for all their insistence that it was my turn to step up, they still took him back. Because as much as they didn't want him there, they really didn't want to be seen as the parents who abandoned their son. They had spent so long painting me as the cruel, ungrateful one for setting boundaries that they couldn't bring themselves to do the same. So they let him back in, resentfully, reluctantly, but they let him back in. And within a week, the cracks started showing. The first phone call from my mom came 5 days later, and I knew before I even answered that it wasn't going to be an apology. It was exhaustion. She sounded drained, like every ounce of energy had been sucked out of her. She talked about how my brother wasn't even trying to find a job, how he spent his days sleeping in and his nights going out, how he acted like he was a guest in a hotel instead of a grown adult living under his parents' roof. The next call came a few days after that. Things were going missing. Small things at first, cash left on the counter, jewelry she swore she had placed in a drawer, little valuables that had been in the same place for years and were suddenly nowhere to be found. My dad's watch, the one that had mysteriously disappeared during my brother's last visit, had definitely been stolen, but of course, when confronted, my brother had no idea what they were talking about. He acted offended at the suggestion, as if the mere accusation was the real betrayal, as if their trust in him should remain intact no matter how many times he had broken it. And my parents? They didn't know what to do. They had spent so much time justifying his actions when he was hurting other people, but now that they were the ones being lied to, stolen from, disrespected in their own home, they were at a loss. So they called me again. Not to ask me to take him back this time, because they knew that door was closed for good, but to vent. To complain. To tell me how hard it was, how impossible he was being, how they were trying so hard to help him but he just wasn't listening. And I told my mom, flat out, this is exactly what I warned you about. For the first time, she didn't argue with me. She just sighed. Because she knew. She knew she had been wrong. She knew she had ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every desperate attempt I had made to get them to see him for what he really was. And now, they had to live with the mess they had defended for so long. I don't know how long they'll last before they finally reach their breaking point, before they're forced to admit that there is no fixing this, that my brother isn't just going through a phase or struggling temporarily, that he has always been this way and they've just refused to acknowledge it. But one thing is for sure. I will not be their backup plan when they do.